Hello, everyone, and welcome to Center for Healthy Sex monthly webinar on Mirror of Intimacy. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and I'm talking to you from Los Angeles today at Center for Healthy Sex. And today is Monday, July 6th, the first Monday after our Independence Day celebration this weekend. I hope whatever you did was safe and that it was enjoyable for you. And that you were able to spend some time with friends and family and those that were even perhaps familiar to you, since that is our topic today, familiarity. So I'll start with the quote from Hafiz, who says, "Your heart and my heart are very old friends." And that's such a beautiful saying because there's nothing like a dear old friend. Our friends and those who are most familiar with us hold our history in ways that no one else does. And that can't be bought and it can't be found in a new friendship either. Sometimes just a passing glance or a song or a moment can be shared together with old friends that crosses decades of time. And we feel so seen and so known in those moments. And yet we've all heard the term that familiarity breeds contempt. This is an old saying, and it's a cynical saying also. It implies that a deep acquaintance is going to lead to boredom. It's going to lead to perhaps even disrespect, because contempt is a combination of disgust and anger. And in fact, John Gottman tells us that when a couple starts to feel contempt, that's a really bad sign for a relationship, because they really have lost respect for, I would say, themselves and also for each other. So that notion that we're sort of sick of someone, and that saying about familiarity breeds contempt is often a way to justify starting to look outside of our love relationships at other people, looking for someone who's new and more exciting and sort of the, proverbial shiny object. And yet when we do that, we're really discarding the intimacy, the deep intimacy in the relationship, and we're willing to replace it with something much more superficial. Because face it, no matter how exciting or interesting somebody new is, there is a superficiality to that, because you can only know that person so deeply. And oftentimes we'll think that, oh, but this is the one, or this is a cosmic relationship. And that cosmicness is really the novelty of the expression of dopamine, the neurochemical in the brain that has us learning new things and has us getting excited about things or people. But that doesn't necessarily telegraph depth. And it certainly doesn't telegraph time or a deep relationship with someone. So our disenchantment in longstanding relationships can come when we start to see something completely new and unfamiliar in our partner. Like, why are they doing that now? And we start to judge what it is they're doing because we've never seen the depth of perhaps that pattern in our partner before. And whereas we could look the other way when we first met them, because we're willing to look the other way on a whole bunch of things when we're falling in love with someone, which is nature's way of kind of gluing us together and having us fall in love. When we start to see it in a pronounced way, because we've been living with someone for years on end, then we can start to have a judgment about it. And that very judgment is a way of starting to create separation and push our partner away, and to start to see them in a way that feels angry or disrespectful, because we're not curious about the behavior. We're not saying, that's interesting. Why are they doing that over and over again? Or why do they do that way? And can I look beyond my judgment? And what is that judgment telling me about my own self? So when we relapse into old familiar patterns that have been limiting, and they limit our ability to relate, we have to look at what our part is in it also. What is our side in why that person all of a sudden is not looking so hot, or they're not looking as exciting as they once did? Where is our judgment coming from? And why is it that we want to create this separation. And often creating that kind of separation is our own discomfort with intimacy. It's too close. I feel too known, or I notice that my nervous system is getting activated and I'm feeling like I'm going to be suffocated, or that my partner wants too much of me, or they want something I can't give them. And those statements are really telegraphs for us to start to be more curious about our own selves, to ask ourselves, why is it that I'm having this reaction right now, even though this is a reaction I've had my whole life? So, in other words, it's an old reaction. And I haven't been curious enough about my own self to start to deconstruct why I have that reaction. So if your partner says to you, and all of us do this to our partners, we say something like, I want to talk to you, or there's something I want to talk to you about, or can we make time to talk this weekend? Those of us that are avoidant automatically have a reaction like, oh, what do you mean you want to talk to me? Like, am I in trouble, or what's going on, or what's happening, or something bad is coming down the pike, is the assumption that we make because we have this jumpy feeling internally. And many of us would rather just not deal with that. And so we want to blame our partners for being too needy or too picky or wanting something from us, as opposed to asking ourselves, well, why is it that I have this reaction when my partner just wants to talk to me? I mean, maybe they want to talk to me about, what are we doing this weekend? Or let's plan a weekend trip away. Or I want to talk to you about, the good news about our child in school, or what a fun thing our puppy did this week that you didn't get to see. Like, it doesn't have to be this ominous thing that's coming towards us. And yet, if we're still having a reaction that we had in childhood that has us jumpy, then we want to be very curious about that jumpiness. There is a question from someone saying, my partner and I have been together for 10 years. Personally, when we get into an argument, I can start disconnecting from the conversation and get defensive. From the outside looking in, I can see this happening like the same old car crash, but I don't stop myself from disconnecting or shutting down. My defense mechanism, not sharing my feelings and staying quiet. Are there plans that partners who struggle with intimacy can create to stay present in the conversation with their partners? That's a really great question. And I think, the good news about that question is whomever's asking it is having an awareness. They're noticing, oh, I'm starting to shut down now. So at a time when you're not having an argument or disagreement, it's really important for you to talk to your partner and to say, you know what, there's a point sometimes in our conversations, or when they start to get heated or argumentative, that I notice that I start to flood, because that's what's happening. There's way too much coming at you in the moment, and you're starting to flood, and as such, you start to dissociate mildly to moderately. And so to be able to say to your partner, when that starts to happen, are you okay if I say, I'm starting to flood right now. Can we just stop? Can we take a break? And then you have to ask yourself, how much of a break do you need? Do you need 5 minutes? Do you need 10 minutes? Do you need to go outside? Do you need to get some cold water? What do you need to do to bring yourself back from that dissociative avoidant state? And also, what can your partner do to help you out? Do they maybe need to change the tone of their voice? Do they need to settle themselves down also? Do the two of you need to sit down and face each other in a chair where you're sitting knee to knee, eyeball to eyeball, so that you're not across the room or pacing around the kitchen where you can't really see each other, which is when fights start to escalate? So what do both of you need to help you keep your higher cortical functions online, so you can breathe, so you can hear what's actually being said? Because what's happening is you're reading it subcortically, and you're reading danger. And the minute that starts to happen, you start to shut down, as you're saying, or get defensive and drift away. So the idea is that you want to be able to talk, and so that you're feeling heard, and you want to listen so that you are hearing your partner also. And there are plenty of talking and listening boundaries that you can find probably online about how to effectively listen when you're having a conversation with someone. And then you have to take care of yourself by saying, I need to stop, or I need to take a deep breath, or I need us to face each other, or it would be helpful to me if you used I statements and didn't use statements that sounded blaming to me, and that you could also manage your tone of voice. And these will be unique to each dyad, each couple, each situation. But do start to talk to your partner about this at times when you're not in a heated conversation, so that you can create rules and also an environment that invites getting to know each other better. So when we make our own particular truths understandable, which is essentially what I'm talking about, if my partner knows that I had a father that was very sort of brusque or dictatorial in his way of thinking, or attacking, and the minute I start to hear a male voice coming at me, I start to get defensive because the organism, the body, is reading danger. Even though my partner's not dangerous, he's maybe just upset or animated, my brain, the primitive part of my brain, is reading it incorrectly. It's reading it as if I were a teenager at home, which I'm not. So I have to remind myself that this is my husband, this is not my father, and that this is happening in real time, and I am having a reaction. And so I need to work with my own internal process so that I can sustain this capacity with familiarity with my partner, and to know that sometimes he gets animated, or he raises his voice, or he's even getting angry, but it doesn't mean that I'm being attacked or that it's emotionally abusive of me. It just means this is his expression of what's true for him in this moment. And how can I stay present with his experience instead of collapsing down into a, little girl state? So these are the sorts of things that we want to work with our own internal processes. And when we develop a capacity for familiarity through our experiences, we start to learn from other people's stories. We start to share narratives with them. We start to have our own experiences all the way around. And that is the tapestry that creates familiarity. If you have a sibling that you are close to, you've probably had to work through different snarls and such in order to have that closeness. You have to be willing to deal with your defensiveness or your fear or your honesty about them so that you can heal and merge into a more constructive relationship with them. And that allows us to move in closer. If the minute a familiar relationship gets challenging or difficult, we discard it, we're never going to have deep, long-standing loves. And that is really, I think, a tragedy and a lacking in our lives. And I heard a story on NPR last week about a woman who was Asian American and her father. And unfortunately, I only caught a snippet of it, but I think the gist of the story was that she'd moved away from home because she wanted to get away from her family. They were immigrants and she was first generation like myself. And eventually she ended up moving back to the town where she grew up in so she could start to have a relationship with her father, who didn't speak English very well. And she endured the difficulties and the struggles and sort of the gnarliness of trying to connect with him. And over time, they started speaking regularly. Like they went from, speaking weekly to speaking every day. And eventually she started learning Cantonese so she could converse with him and he could help her with her Cantonese also. So it was a really beautiful story of working with the familiar, working through the rough patches and the difficulties, so that we can come to a greater and deeper understanding of those that we actually love the most in the world. Someone asks, if contempt is already developed in a relationship and existed for a long time, is it too late? Also, what are some of the non-severe trauma causes of being avoidant of intimacy? Well, I think if contempt has been around and it's been a long time, that really is a death knell for a relationship, because unless both parties are really willing to rise above it and also get honest about their hurts and their vulnerabilities and hear each other, it's very difficult to repair that, because there's a hatred that accompanies contempt, a disgust. And if you're disgusted by someone, you can't respect them. And if you can't respect someone, you can't love them. And you certainly can't make love with them. So I would recommend that you do some serious couples therapy in that configuration, or you end the relationship, because otherwise you're both just living in misery. And the non-severe trauma causes of being avoidant, I mean, avoidance really is made in infancy and early childhood. If you have an avoidant mother who cannot contingently attune to her infant in ways that help the infant soothe itself, the infant will learn to soothe itself. And we call that auto-regulation instead of co-regulation between the mother and the infant. And that attachment trauma is probably the trauma that most avoidant people actually struggle with the most. So avoidance is made early on, and this comes from unrepaired, chronic micro assaults on the infant and the toddler and child. So the parent is insensitive. It doesn't mean that they are, beating or physically abusive or constantly being emotionally abusive. They're just sort of colder and non-responsive and not available. And that sets up a more avoidant strategy for being relational and in relationships. So let's see. I'm trying to think of where I am here about familiarity. Well, there's a question here. So a woman says, I like younger men, more than 10 years younger. Could it work? And I don't see why it wouldn't work. I think there's probably more to that question. But you have to ask yourself what it is about that you like so much. Are you stuck on that for some apparent reason? There are usually power differentials when there are age differences. So do you like younger men because they're easier to manipulate and control and seduce? That would be sort of the worst case scenario. Or do you enjoy them because they are more fun and more active, and you are a super active person and you want to be with someone who can meet your energy? So all of those things, it just depends on what's going on for you before that question can really be answered. So you want to be careful that in sexual relationship, our touch can really help with familiarity. It can have us feeling more responsive, more soothing of ourselves and other people. But we want to broaden our inner awareness so that we keep changing and expanding internally, so that when we are with our partners, especially our lovers, that familiarity is a depth of love that we're experiencing, while being open to new ways of touching and being touched, of new ways of seeing and being seen, of new ways of loving and being loved, all of which make up the total experience of sex and sexuality with someone. And that familiarity, when people have been in relationships for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, can feel like it's putting a damper on a person's sex life, because they're no longer curious about their partner. They feel like they already know what they're going to say, or they already know them, or there's no novelty in the excitation of preparing for sex with them. And those problems are really on us. We can't expect that our partners are going to do anything different. It's just a question of whether we are seeing them through novel eyes. Are we seeing them through new eyes? Are we seeing parts of them that we've never seen before, even though we've known them forever? Because none of us are the same day in and day out and week in and week out. unless we're just completely bored with ourselves. And I have to say, recently, during this COVID crisis, I've been starting to feel quite bored with myself. I realized this weekend that I haven't learned anything really challenging or new in a very long time. I know a lot of things well, and I do a lot of those things by rote well, and I could say they're interesting things, but I haven't learned a new skill set, like a new language or a new dance step, or tried to learn how to paint or play an instrument. I mean, all of those things would really be challenging for me. And I realized that I'm kind of bored with my own self. So if I'm bored with myself, why would my lover find me interesting or exciting if they've been with me for 20 years? If I'm not bringing something new or interesting, or I'm not really on fire or excited about something, that's what makes us attractive, is our own internal elasticity, the ways in which we're challenging ourselves inside. So I want to ask you to think about ways that you have conditioned yourself emotionally, physically, mentally, and sexually, and how you can start to stretch out those explorations and finding new topics along those lines. So we have some questions here. Someone says, I've been in recovery for love addiction for 5 years, and a few months ago started sober dating someone who's also a love addict. We like each other, but from the first date, it's felt like she made me, quote, the one, and saw me as her partner very quickly, and it's amped up my avoidance in a major way. I'm sure it has. It would certainly amp mine up. And has led to most of our dates feeling like therapy conversations instead of light and fun. Is this about foundation for finding a partner? Well, it's unfortunate because what's happening on the other side is that that person is moving too fast for you, that she's sort of lunging at the relationship, which is what love addicts do. And you're trying to slow her down and say, look, I want to get to know you. I need to feel that I'm falling in love with you, not just in this love addicted fantasy with you. And if she can't adjust to that, and she can't take it someplace else, by the way, to a sponsor, to her fellowship, to a therapist, then you shouldn't be the one that's modulating that with her. You've done the right thing by bringing it up and saying, look, this feels too much, too fast for me. I need to take it slower, because your nervous system has to be able to titrate the affection, the attention, the touch, the intimacy, so you can start to build capacity. Because that's what happens with avoidance, is that in the same way that the brain is plastic, and the same way I actually could learn a new dance step, or I could learn to paint or play the drums, which I tried this weekend and was not that good at, I can also learn to tolerate more eye contact, more compliments, more touch. And that is capacity in the autonomic nervous system. So learning a new dance step is mostly in the central nervous system. It's also in the body because it's dance. But learning a new way of being in the world also has to do with our bodies and that nervous system that is also plastic. So if your partner is willing to look at her tendency to move too fast and to manage her anxiety around that elsewhere, and you're looking at your capacity for moving slowly and your need to metabolize things as they go along, and you're willing to take a deep breath and say thank you when she compliments you, or tolerate hugging a little bit longer than you're comfortable with, then the two of you are actually learning from each other, and you will move towards each other in a more appropriate way. If she can't slow down and it feels like you're being assaulted and it's too much and too fast, you probably want to stop that relationship and say, okay, I just learned what is right for me and what works for me. So I'm going to say no to this person, and I'm going to move on to someone who can be more appropriate with what I need. That was a great question, Nicholas. Thank you. Someone says, my husband and I have different views on consensual non-monogamy, which in turn has made me feel constrained. We're working through these different views, but I'm concerned that these feelings of constraint have compounded to having much less sex than we both would like. What are some ways to encourage change in a long-term relationship that's lost its sexual excitement? So if you're talking about if you can't agree on consensual non-monogamy, then you're not going to be able to do it in a consensual way. And usually in those situations when people are opening up their marriages, one person has more interest in it than the other. So just like my previous conversation with Nicholas, the two of you have to figure out who's moving faster than the other, and you've got to take time so that both parties can catch up with each other, whether it's slowing down and being more tolerant and being more compassionate of the person who's moving slower, or deciding that that is actually not the way that you're going to introduce novelty into your marriage, and that you're going to have to find other ways of doing that. And I can't advise you on what those other ways are because I don't know who you are, but it's up to the two of you to start to be honest about what turns you on, what's exciting to you, what are the things that you would be hopeful for in having sex with other people, and how can you start to create that within your own relationship, whether it's some sort of role play that you engage in, or conversations you have that maybe you've never had before about what your sexual preferences are, what you like, what's exciting to you. Sometimes just the simple act of being vulnerable about sex and sexuality can be arousing to two people because, again, you're starting to see the novel in each other in the face of the familiarity that wraps around the whole relationship. I often, or I would love to hear more about, I often meet avoidant men. I tend to be more anxious. These men never want to commit, and I'm fully aware of attachment theory. I consistently look at my side and have done so much work on myself. I'm able to see the avoidance quicker, but I don't know how to shift into actively finding men who are available. Well, I would say the minute that you feel like someone's avoidant, you should say no and move on. So the strategy there is that you say no a lot until you meet someone who's more secure and more available. So if you know what the telltale signs of avoidance are, the minute you see them or feel them, then you just don't go out on a second date or a third date, and you cut your losses faster. And then you also have to look at your level of anxiety, and if your anxiety is activating avoidance in those men in the same way that was probably going on with Nicholas also. He may be fine going into a situation, and if he meets someone who's more secure and less anxious and not lunging at the relationship, he may move along just fine and not look so avoidant himself. But the minute somebody comes at him rapidly, he's going to become more regressed, more avoidant. So this is a dance, actually. You might want to all of you, take a look at Stan Tatkin's book, Wired for Dating, where he talks about these anxious and avoidant dyads coming together and what things to look for when you're dating. If you're married, his book Wired for Love is very helpful with these anxious and avoidant couplings, which happen quite a bit, actually. Let's see, I would love to hear more about familiarity with oneself. As I question core beliefs and old patterns, I feel unfamiliar to myself. How do I cue my body that this new thinking is in fact safe? Well, that's a really great question, because I think when we are really familiar with ourselves, it's a paradox like every other thing in life, is that it's really important, and we preach this a lot for people that are in recovery, is that you have to know yourself. And also, I talk about it a lot with sex and sexuality, that if you know what you like sexually, what you want sexually, what turns you on sexually, then you're able to communicate that to a partner. And if a partner is willing and able to do that with you, then you've got a good fit or a good match there. But if you don't know yourself, you can't communicate that. But then knowing oneself can lead to complacency. Like, I already know that about myself, or I know I don't like that, or I'm not willing to try that, or no, no, no. This sort of shyness or self-consciousness can arise that really keeps us from knowing ourselves. But when we dive deeply and we start to learn things that we don't like about ourselves, that's when it gets tricky. So I happen to notice tendencies that I don't like that much about myself, and I notice them as I get older. And I start to see these tendencies, as my mother's. And it's not about blaming my mother. It's just, I know her history really well. I know where she comes from. I know her ancestral history. It all makes good sense that she was the way she was. But she could be really challenging sometimes. She could be very harsh and kind of shut people off and shut people down at times. And that tendency of hers was really useful in a lot of situations, and also not useful in close-in love relationships and friendships. And so I notice that tendency in myself now, and I don't like it. It's not appealing. It's not nice. It's unkind. And so I have to constantly work against that when I hear that thought in my head, to stop it or to breathe or to take a break before I interact with someone, if my tendency is to be, short with them. So it's not fun to see this sort of character defect or flaw in myself. I don't like it. That's a little bit different than your question about how do you cue your body that this new thinking is safe. That sounds like maybe you've kept yourself safe for a long time by avoiding close in contact or love relationships. And now you've seen that that defense was an old defense against getting hurt. And so dropping that defense and being more vulnerable is the risk you have to take in order to love. And part of loving is getting hurt. Even in the greatest loves, even in our most secure relationships, we always disappoint each other. We always hurt each other. It's inevitable. So you've got to be willing to get hurt. And this notion of safety, I think we have to be careful about too, because is the safety about bodily harm? Like, is someone actually going to physically hit you or punch you? Or is it that you're uncomfortable? And it's okay to be uncomfortable. We have to tolerate discomfort in order to grow and change. There's no other way to do it. I mean, learning a new dance step or learning a new language is horribly uncomfortable. It's embarrassing, you're clunky, the final product doesn't look so hot. Just all of it is not good, but it's necessary in order to grow and change and learn. So risk the discomfort, you're going to have to take a leap of faith and be uncomfortable in order to work through these pattern changes. Okay, someone says, in my former relationship, as soon as I had sex, it didn't work anymore. And I feel very anxious about sex. What can I do? Well, it seems to me you were having sex too soon then. And you weren't really connected to yourself or to that person, because sex should really be sort of the final move that you make with someone when you are interested in being in a relationship. But you should get to know the person and see all the mechanics of the relationship before you do that. Otherwise, that would tell me that you're having sex too quickly. What if you don't do things sexual because you're afraid it will feel icky? Well, that's another one of those things where you've got to examine what about that is icky to you. Where is that coming from? Is that a thought? Is it a feeling state? Is it because somebody did something to you when you were a child and it was inappropriate? Is it just because you have some idea about what it would say about you? And this is really a therapeutic question. This is something for you to work out in therapy, and to ask those questions of you. Where is that coming from? And then will you take a leap of faith in order to try it anyway? Because all of us thought, French kissing was disgusting when we first heard about it at 6 or 8 years old. We thought it was really icky and gross. And by the time we were 14, we were doing it and we thought it was fantastic. So you got to be careful about what you're naming icky and why that is. and then tolerating, again, your discomfort so that you can be more of a sexual adult, and not operating from a place of, it's a younger self that thinks it's icky. So someone writes, I've been in SLAA recovery over 5 years, but just started dating with a dating plan. I recently started dating a coworker. He's a widower and I feel responsible for him. That's curious. I wonder why. He seems to still be in love with his deceased wife, oh dear, who passed away 3 years ago. I feel he's a good person, but feel he's clinging to me. I feel a little manipulated by him when I tried to break off romantic dating when he sent me a picture of himself crying. Okay, that's definitely a manipulation. So number one, you are not responsible for him. It sounds like he's extremely needy and he has not appropriately grieved the loss of his wife. And now he's glomming onto you to caretake to him. So it sounds like he's got his own love addiction issues. So he may be a decent person, but it doesn't mean that he is a good match for you. I feel I'm repeating a previous dating problem and start to feel contempt. So this is a red light, which means you should stop. I also see a lot of red flags. How do I get out of this respectfully since I work with him and honor myself? I think there is a way. So you say, I feel anxiety and missed him when I tried to break it off, even though I don't feel he's right. Okay, so you have to break this off. You've given us all the reasons for why you have to break it off. And you can do it in a way that's kind, which is probably really good for you, to feel your anxiety and to say no, because people that struggle with any kind of behavioral addiction, sex, love, codependency, have a really hard time saying no and tolerating the discomfort of not feeling like you also have to take care of the other person. So it's okay to say to him, you know what, I really appreciate the time we've had together, and you've got to use your own words here. I've really enjoyed getting to meet you. I think you're a good person, but I don't think this is the right relationship for me at this time. And so I'm okay if we do X, Y, and Z together. You've got to determine what that is. If it means that you get together once a month or twice a month and nobody's going to movies together now, or get together twice a month and go for a walk in the park at social distance, you're fine with that. But you would like him to stop texting you every day, stop calling you, stop whatever the day-to-day relational issues look like, so that you can move on and meet someone who is appropriate for you. So you need to set very clear boundaries in your head first. And then you need to honor him and where he's at. And I don't think I would get into telling him what he needs to do for himself, like get to therapy, go to grief counseling, all of that. That's not your responsibility. You just need to say no, and you don't owe him an explanation for no, other than it doesn't feel like it's a good match at this time for you. And to hold that boundary and to feel like what it's like to hold it without explaining it away. All right, so I do want to make sure that we wrap this up. There are a few more questions here. Someone says they're a fantasy addict and struggling to get a hold of daydreaming about romantic relationships. I drift off mentally. Images of my mother's boyfriend who abused me during my childhood come to mind. So I would say that you're having traumatic reactions, and this is a form of dissociation that you are engaging in, and that you really need help from a trained professional, that it's not likely you're going to be able to stop this on your own because these are pattern behaviors in the brain. And so really looking into somebody who's skilled at EMDR would be great for this type of recall that you're having, excuse me, about sexual tampering and abuse. So make sure you get the help you need, because you're really going to be stuck in these patterns and you won't be able to get into a real relationship with a real person because you'll be so stuck in this. And another person writes, if a major part of our primitive or habituated brain process is entrenched fear, dissociative avoidance, willfulness, paralysis, intellectual rationalization. Okay, so you've mixed up a whole bunch of stuff here. How do we get on board with what you spoke to, tolerating discomfort, leap of faith? I want it cognitively to change. Well, fear, everything that you're talking about sounds like traumatic reactions. And again, These things require a much deeper look in therapy with a skilled professional, because these things do not just go away by themselves, and you cannot cognitively override them. You can only do so much cognitively through self-help books, through step work, through program, but at some point you need someone who can take you into these much deeper defenses and to get to the feeling states behind them so you can become more integrated and more whole. And you can't really do that by yourself. You need someone there who's you can trust, who can help you get through the feelings in a way that feels soothing and highly attuned to. So get the help that you need. So I just want to remind those of you that are male that are on this call that struggle with fantasy and love addiction. I am doing an all-day workshop this Saturday starting at 7:30 a.m. Pacific time till 4:30 p.m. Pacific time for male love addicts. And you can you can call our office to sign up for that, 310-843-9902. And that's this Saturday, July 11th, where I'll be able to answer a lot more detailed questions for you about your love addiction and help you start to work through some of that. So make sure that, again, you're looking at your own patterns, your own limitations, your own thinking that, oh, that's icky sexually, so I don't want to try it. Or I already know that about my partner, so I'm not going down that road. Or I need my partner to do X, Y, and Z. Or my sex life is boring. It's because they're not doing something they need to do. As opposed to, what is going on with me? What do I need to look at? Where are my limitations? Where have I gotten stilted or stuck or just kind of lazy about my own desire for love or novelty seeking or sexuality with my partner? And that way, genuine familiarity starts to breed contentment instead of contempt. So see if you can turn this on its head with all the people in your life, whether it's your parents or your siblings or your oldest friend or your long-term love relationship, and stop taking those people for granted. And it's interesting, during COVID, those are the people that we are all sort of stuck with, right? Our friends and family, our closest friends and family, that I'm using stuck in a way, sort of sarcastically. But to start to say that, wow, these are my peeps. These are the people that love me, that are the closest. So how do I start to laugh with them and love with them in new and different ways and be deeply grateful that I even have them in my life? So in today's entry in Mirror of Intimacy, one of the daily sex acts says to recognize the enjoyable familiarity you feel for everyone in your life. So everyone that's in your sphere today, take a look at them and see them as new or different. Be grateful for them. See them as sexual beings also, and give them a compliment about how they look or how they're feeling. And then, think about how delicious that comfortable connection is, and how important it is, so that you can share them with the people that you're with today. And then when you sense conflict or discomfort, familiarize yourself with your own internal programming. So in my case, it's like, oh, there's my mother's voice, or that, happened because that's just the way that she managed things, but I don't have to manage things like that today. And so take a look at what's happening if I'm triggered, or I'm trying to hide a mistake, or I'm not looking so good, or I feel insecure, or I'm feeling this way towards this person, and I've got to look at what's going on with me. So challenge yourself out of your familiar patterns and into your gratitude for that which is familiar. So I hope you have a good rest of the day today, and a good July, as it were, that you're staying safe in your surroundings, that you're trying new and different things, even in the limited circles that we have now of just being at home or at work, or with the people that we know the closest. And as always, if you have any questions, you can find us at centerforhealthysex.com. You'll also see our phone number in the chat box for those of you that want to join me this Saturday. Those of you that are male, this is a male love addiction workshop for the day on Saturday. I look forward to seeing all of you. So take good care and be well.